Welcome to Wavelengths, a podcast with Amphenol Broadband Solutions.
What's going on, y'all? It's Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and welcome to another episode of Wavelengths by Amphenol Broadband Solutions. This is our podcast where, if you're a returning listener, you know what kind of topics we get into. But if this is your first time, we dig into the technologies, the trends, the major timely news, the market movers that are shaping the larger world of broadband, internet, and fiber. And we also talk shop on downstream, right? All the ecosystems that are affected by broadband rollouts, by improvements to connectivity. All of the little interconnected nodes get some spotlight time here on Wavelengths. That's exactly where we're focusing in today, actually, downstream into the world of education. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that you're tapped into all of our previous episodes. So make sure you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com. Again, that's amphenolbroadband.com for previous episodes of the show, more context on our solutions and services, obviously, more of our thought leadership, more of our educational content. But you can also subscribe to Wavelengths on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So make sure you do so that you can catch up on all of our previous thought leadership, deep dives with experts, and timely news recaps, and so that you can get notifications when we drop new episodes of the show. All right, team, let's jump in. We've got a good episode for you today. Again, we're going to be looking at the intersection of the broadband industry and its trends and how those are cascading into defining the scope of and impacting trends in academia, more specifically K through 12 environments, higher education, and really the classroom, right? We're going to be looking at how broadband rollouts, trends, technologies, and industry challenges are shaping that world of education. So, whether we're talking about classrooms in rural America or we're talking about sprawling school districts in major metros, the promise of high quality broadband isn't just about faster speeds or convenience, right? It's really about unlocking the future of education for the world of education, right? High quality broadband, is that foundation for a lot of how education is even conducted in the classroom today. When every student has a device in their hand, right? When lessons move to the cloud, when they're gamified, when the phone is actually encouraged in the classroom, which is super foreign to me, right? Phones weren't even allowed in the hallways. You'd get sent to the principal's office. Classic. When AI and immersive technology are part of daily instruction, the network foundation becomes as critical as are the lights on and is there running water at the water fountain, right? And then we look at rural communities. Stakes are even higher here, right? Connectivity can mean the difference between opportunity and total academic isolation or lack of career mobility, right? So 2025 has been so far a year of both momentum and tension in this interplay between fiber, broadband, internet connectivity, and the world of education. On one hand, we're seeing states upgrade their education backbones. They're expanding things like roaming Wi-Fi, classroom Wi-Fi. They're lighting up their community access points, and these all have ripple effects into education. Right. On the other hand, we're seeing schools face things like funding uncertainties, debates over off-campus connectivity, cyber threats, a whole host of challenges. So the question here for our guests too, and for the podcast, for y'all to chew on, is how do we design, build, and operate networks that actually deliver durable classroom outcomes, and not just shiny infrastructure or infrastructure that appeases, the base level of content consumption, let's say, right? Networks that are actually there to support some of the demands around tech-forward education that are now becoming a standard or are already a standard and are just getting more complex in the classroom. So that's where today's guest comes in. We're going to be hearing today from Chuck Girt. He's Chief Technology Officer, CTO at FiberLight. And he's got decades of experience building education and enterprise-grade networks. His career has spanned nonprofit anchor institution builds. He's scaled commercial fiber. And today he's leading FiberLight's technology strategy. So together we're going to dig into the lessons from his playbook. We're going to learn from his previous projects. We're going to unpack some of the big trends that are shaping school connectivity today. We're going to look at the new technology that's hitting classrooms that demands smarter, stronger, faster broadband and internet connections. And we're going to tackle some of the unique realities of rural deployments too. We'll at least touch on it briefly so that you can be left with a checklist, honestly, whether you're an operator, whether you're a decision maker, a school CIO, right? So you can kind of better understand how to maneuver, this environment to help turn available funding and new tech and new strategies into real impacts for students, right? So let's go ahead and jump in, introduce our guest. Again, folks, we're joined today by Chuck Girt, CTO at FiberLight. Chuck, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Great, Daniel. Thanks for having me. I've spent, close to 35 years in the telecommunications industry, kind of growing up from, the old days of Old Sonnet, getting into more of the new fiber infrastructure. My last position was basically a nonprofit where we did exactly what you're saying, solve that digital divide. How do we get bigger bandwidth out into the rural areas? Because again, there's a struggle in those areas to get bandwidth. And just from my experience, when you give the people that kind of bandwidth, you see a complete transformation of a city, a town, of education, of everything that comes with that, because there's healthcare benefits, there's everything that kind of comes with that. So again, happy to be here today, happy to, give you some of my, kind of history of what I've done, and then kind of, what I'm looking at in the future and kind of what's coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to learn a lot by connecting the dots between your experience, your projects that you've executed on and helped lead, right? And some of the realities in the classroom today. And I'm glad you frame it up that way, right? Again, it's like good internet is just as important as any other utility. And when we're looking at education, a strong network foundation isn't just there to support your Chromebook in the classroom and like the library computer or, being able to pull up YouTube during lunch. Like these are foundations that actually define entire curriculum strategies, entire investments into ed tech, into, new tools for, let's say, student safety and security, right? If you don't have a strong foundation, you have an unstable network, or you're not sure it's going to be able to handle the capacity, well, then those investments aren't even going to happen. Those strategies aren't going to happen. So there's a huge downstream effect here that, I just want to make sure that our audience understands, which I'm sure they do. But now we're going to get a little bit more specific here. So we're going to start by learning a little bit from Chuck's playbook here. So you said it yourself. We mentioned it in the intro. You've led nonprofit anchor builds. You've, help build out these enterprise grade networks, enterprise scale networks. What did those worlds, some of your previous projects, teach you about how schools and how these education environments actually use their bandwidth, right? Like what are some of the demands on the network coming out of schools today? And what did that teach you about designing networks, whether that's routes or redundancies, right? Or just setting the foundation of speed that's meant to meet today's education demands? Give us the lay of the land.
And that's a great question. I mean, the first thing we're talking, especially a rural environment, is getting them to understand what do they want to achieve. Because a lot of times they've been bandwidth limited, meaning that they've been working with what they have available to them, whatever that is, T1 services, DSL services. For my past, the anchor to any good build is fiber optics. You have to have fiber optics. Again, as right now, you can go up to 400, 800, 1.6 terabits a day. Now, does every school need that? No. But again, to be able to bring a kind of a bandwidth, a 10 gigabit connection into a school district to say now they can connect AI, now they can collect the CDN providers, now they can, basically connect into remote education, that's transformational. So for me, looking at, how do you create a fiber optic infrastructure out in the middle of, I hate to say it, in the middle of nowhere sometimes, is tough. I mean, there's a cost component to it that you got to look at, but you got to look at the cost and the benefit that basically the schools and the education system is going to get. You hit it on the head earlier. Security is so important today for a lot of the school systems. So again, having a good connection, again, gets you connected better into the community, gets you connected better into other resources that help you grow, not only the kids, but the kind of surrounding community as well.
And a school network is one that really has to be dynamic, right? When you think about the way devices are used on a school network, not only is the sort of the base, the foundation of bandwidth already pretty I don't know about extreme. That's maybe a little dramatic, but it's, it's significant, right? Like you've got everyone on their phones. You have many devices in the classroom, supporting facilities management, all that kind of good stuff. But then you also have major spikes, right? The network has to be able to handle things like huge testing bursts. Right? These 30-minute chunks of the day, everyone's whipping out their phones and doing some gamified exam. Now everyone's phone is connecting to that server, right? You've got LMS spikes, video spikes, or lunch hour storms. Everyone's, consuming all their YouTube content for 30 minutes real quick before they're back to the classroom. So, I'm curious how some of those realities, like how technology is used in the classroom, has shaped some of your thinking around building that foundational network, right? Any examples or anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said, with all that bandwidth demand, again, you have to look at high bandwidth, kind of services, gigabit, 10 gigabit going into there. It has to be very reliable. Again, more and more is depending on the internet, again, connectivity, getting, again, the content closer to the edge. How do you get that content closer to the school? Building diverse networks in, having diverse fiber paths, in rural areas or towns that, hey, fiber cuts happen, things happen as construction goes, but how do we keep that school operating? Because that's part of the issue today is there's so much depending on really all the technologies you just kind of spoke about. It requires connectivity. So it's building a diverse, high resilient network to get it back into more of the urban areas where you can do those offloads into the major providers. And again, it's just about scalability. Today, what we see today, it's only going to grow. I mean, you talk about AI and the actual growth of AI teaching. We've seen some, cases where 10 gig won't be enough, where you might actually start looking at 40, 100 gigs into schools to be able to bring AI immersive learning into a classroom so that people have the advantage that most of the urban schools have with that direct connectivity that now they can bring out to the rural. So again, it's fiber infrastructure, it's redundant, resilient connectivity, and it's really just growing the future of, again, the schools and the kids.
Yeah, and it's there to support things like one-to-one devices, right? Everyone has their computer, and it's like 2-to-1. Everyone has their computer and their phone, in the classroom, and they're using them actively. It's there to support cloud video and LMS. It's there to support AI-assisted curriculum. But what's your go-to design, when we compare things like dark fiber versus lit waves? Right. And for our audience, if you're unfamiliar with that, right, dark fiber, think of it like lease strands that you light yourself. Lit waves being, you're buying managed capacity. So let's get into that layer of technical specific when you're designing a network for a specific school or a school district or a municipality. How do some of those decisions, get shaped, especially when you're thinking of that bandwidth usage in the classroom, those devices and those services that are now standard in the classroom?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, the first thing I look at is the experience of the staff that's going to be supporting this. Dark fiber, it's bare strands. They have to be able to manage the equipment. They have to be able to manage the routing. They have to be able to manage everything from that. If it's a larger school district, like in Texas, there are a lot of larger school districts here that can't support that. So where dark fiber would work great for them, and really they can define their own future. They can put in whatever they need to do it. Really, from a lit services standpoint, I think that's where more of the middle to small schools are going to get to. And whether that, again, you could talk wave services, but again, that's expensive. That could get, quite a bit when you're putting in DWDM to support that. My go-to has always been, some form of an MPLS network. And even though they say MPLS is old and dead, it's not. It's actually behind a lot of the technologies that are used today that are up and coming. Again, doing a high bandwidth 10 gig connection, using a protocol like RSVP to do redundancy, and just, have the best pass that you can to get to the source of the material. So really, it's kind of, sitting down with the school districts, understanding what is their future, what do they want it to look like. Is dark fiber the right for them? Then if yes, that's what they want to do, then again, you design a dark fiber, either single path or diverse. If they want lit service, you look at what kind of capacity they're looking at. If it's more capacity, especially if you get the university side, 100 gig wave might be fine for them to get them back to one of the major centers, to get to one of the research networks. Again, if it's a smaller medium school, maybe it's just a lit service will be a gigabit services that's redundant, that I can get them back to internet drains, or I can get them to basically content delivery, basically get to that as quick as possible. So again, it's kind of a multi-phased approach. Again, it's always working with the individual school systems and the individual contributors that are there. They're going to be managing this to kind of understand and get their mindset set. Don't do what you're doing today. What do you want to do tomorrow, and be able to enable that?
A theme of the episode today is, the rural reality, or the rural dynamic that makes some of these challenges and strategies a little bit more acute. You have plenty of experience here, right, rolling out networks and project build-outs in rural environments. So on some of these rural projects, what were some of the stickiest blockers that you found, right, that made it difficult to get the network to where it needed to be for the benefit of the classroom, or with kind of those education demands on the horizon, right? And what were some of the pre-work strategies you deployed, or partnerships, or roundtable conversations with key decision makers that help make some of those blockers melt away, and you actually able to execute on those build outs? Maybe give us an example if you have a solid anecdote.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, the hardest thing to deal with, especially in the rural environments, is just, the cost it takes to build to that remote area. So some of the roadblocks really get into more of the municipalities and more of the local carriers that don't want someone coming in taking business from them. Even though they're not willing to upgrade services, they will fight tooth and nail to make sure you don't get there. So again, it's partnering with the cities, partnering with other, people, that kind of come in, that allow that understand that, hey, we have to bring a future here. If your local provider isn't going to do that, let us enable that. That has been the biggest blocker that I've seen, is really just dealing with the governments, then the local entities, the CLECs, or the ILECs, or stuff that are in the area. After that, the harder part is, again, justifying basically building, maybe it's 10 miles off the network. There's a cost to that. So what you got to do is, when you're looking at building is, especially when you're an operator, what enterprise business, what mobile towers can I hit on the way? What healthcare systems can I hit on the way? Because that can offset basically the cost, because if I can pick up customers along that path that help, kind of service that, or basically pay for that, it allows me really to extend that build out to, basically give the school a lower cost, type solution for what they need. Other than that, again, it's sometimes, in the rural area, again, it's sometimes just having them being more forward thinking, because again, you look at, there is a cost to doing business. And if they say, whoa, that's way too much, we'll stick with our T1. But it's like, can you really get by with basically 1.544 megabits for the next 5 years? And how are you going to bring this new technology into your classrooms? You're thinking too small. So you got to kind of think broader. You got to look at, hey, this is what it's going to enable. And again, like I was talking earlier about the community, this is what it's going to enable in the community. I can now connect you to fire, safety, everything that comes with that. City Hall, we can get you connected to the TV stations, everything else that comes with that. That has been, again, probably the top three that I've seen, again, is pretty much dealing with the governments, dealing with the municipalities, local carriers, and then just, kind of the tech debt that's out there, because that's all they're familiar with, is just, this is all we have, this is all we've ever had, is to kind of get them to start thinking forward about how we can do better for, basically our children.
So let's transition now, and thanks for all that context, and getting our audience a little more acquainted with your way of thinking, your experience. I want to touch base now on some timely news or trends that are shaping this strategic interconnection between fiber networks and just generally network build-outs and education strategies. And mostly this is, to kind of help our audience, whether they are educators or decision makers in an education environment, or they're on the broadband side of things, to get a better pulse on how to maneuver the current lay of the land. So first question here is trying to get a sense for how districts should plan out some of their curricula, let's say, or their tech investments around, what's really happening in the market. So, for example, we saw earlier in June, SCOTUS upheld their Universal Service Fund, which is basically just that they are stabilizing E-rate funding for schools and libraries. So some funding news there. We continue to see BEAD rollouts and clarification on how those funds are going to be made useful at the state level. Earlier in May, we had Texas opening up something like $3.8 billion in funding. They had a state match window too. So that was a major new pipeline several months back for last mile and anchor builds. But I'm curious, between some of that recent court clarity or school connectivity funds or, states moving forward with their BEAD plans and those becoming a little bit more concrete, what should districts feel confident planning for in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months, right? Like, what I know it's hard to say in a general sweeping way because it's so different municipality to municipality, state to state, but just generally, like, should they be planning for major improvements and changes in network capacity? Or are there other things that you think they should be cautious on and that they should be, investing in new technologies and new, building out new lesson plans even, with, again, a little caution around some of these changes or lack of changes? Just kind of what's your pulse check there?
No, I mean, that is a great question because there's so many caveats to that, dealing with, especially in the rural markets, the different school districts, whether they're little or small. I mean, to start out with a lot of the E-rate funding, again, that's the key to how a lot of these schools get a lot of their, kind of funds to kind of, foster this kind of growth in build mode. So really, I think the first thing, as I said earlier, it's kind of like, where do they want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? That's really where they need to start over the next 12 to 24 months. How do I build to a roadmap I want to get to? Bandwidth is coming. I mean, you said it there. You made a lot of good references earlier about, the stuff that's coming, AI, remote lesson plans. Basically, there's a lot of, collaboration going on between universities and schools, especially high schools, trying to get kids learning earlier. So really, it's looking at, those bandwidth requirements. Today you might not say I don't need it, but again, fiber is the base of all this. So looking at, yes, I might not need a large circuit today, but I'm going to need to grow. So meaning that I'm not going to go out and get, a 50 meg, DSL circuit or some kind of cable modem circuit to say, hey, this is going to last me forever. It's not. So again, as you look at the different programs coming in, and you mentioned BEAD as well, I mean, BEAD to me is a great thing because again, it really allows build in the really remote areas. But what that helps us do is kind of enable those last mile players to, get a middle mile, basically getting back to the rural areas that we get them connectivity to internet, to basically research networks, different things like that that can be used for education. So, most of what I'm thinking, for the future is, plan for bandwidth. You don't need it all day one. You're not going to need 100 gig day one. But again, plan that you're going to grow, to me, exponentially over time, especially with AI coming in, especially AI talking to AI, or, again, classroom talking to classroom, building to building, and all the communications that comes with that. So again, you can start small, but again, fiber optics being the base infrastructure, build basically your network for the future. Don't build it for the now, build it for the future, knowing that, hey, I'm going to get this way. And then as the funding comes in and stuff like that, you can use different mechanisms, whether it's grants, whether it's E-rate, whether it's different ways like that, to really foster, kind of the growth of the children, the education platform, what you're doing. And again, look at a digital approach, because a lot of people, especially rural markets, have never had the chance to look at a digital approach to education because they've never really had the bandwidth or the capacity to do it. So this is, kind of the plan going forward, is look at the digital infrastructure, the advantages bringing to kids, because kids are, I mean, you said it earlier, kids are on phones, YouTube, everything else all day long. They have to be aware of technology when they get to the workplace. They're getting there accustomed to that in school with bandwidth, not limiting them to what they can and cannot do. It's just a huge driver. So again, all that stuff, I think, again, from BEAD funding, from, funding from the government, from different things, I think the conglomeration of that is really going to help the rural markets kind of really succeed going forward. Because again, fiber is being built, and it doesn't have to be a single player that has to do it. I mean, we play with a lot of different players in Sandbox to basically make those connections happen, to make the education better. Because again, we're here to help foster, again, the last mile, the middle mile, again, connectivity, bandwidth. That's what we're here to drive, is that growth of bandwidth, that introduction of new technologies into the market to help basically teach, educate, and learn.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of Wavelengths. If you like what you heard and saw, make sure you reach out to Chuck for some more insights and perspectives on this evolving connection between the world of education and its connectivity backbone. And make sure that you're checking out FiberLight as well and all the great work they're doing in their communities. And thanks, folks, for tuning into another episode of Wavelengths. Make sure you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hit that subscribe button so you get notifications when we drop new episodes. And make sure you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com, for more of our thought leadership, resources, and insights on the state of the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll see you on the next episode of Wavelengths.